Shabbat Shalom again. And before I introduce this morning's speaker, Hyman, don't sit down yet. I want to point out that Hyman Cutler is here after having gone to Israel. He spent 5 weeks, don't sit down, stand up. He spent 5 weeks volunteering. Oh, your brother told me 5. 3 weeks volunteering in hospitals. It was really a great gift of your time and your strength and a sign of your commitment to Israel. And so God bless you for doing that. Yeah. And we're looking forward to Rabbi Applebaum returning on Monday, and he'll probably address the congregation next week after bringing a group of about 12 of our congregants and friends to Israel to do some volunteer work this past week. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Always good to be together. It's my pleasure and my privilege to introduce to you Jonathan Ornstein. Before I do so, though, I do want to mention something else about having been in Krakow at 3 different times and having been to that Jewish community center. And over the years that I went there to see its revitalization and that what an important place it has become, not only to the Jews of Poland and Eastern Europe, but also to the Polish people. And one of the things that I felt there over time was this whole sense of the great capacity of the Jewish people to rebirth themselves over and again. It was really beautiful, but it doesn't just happen by grace, it happens because of the work of some very committed people. So let me tell you about Jonathan. He's the CEO of the JCC in Krakow. Since its opening in April 2008 by King Charles III, Jonathan has served as the CEO of the Jewish Community Center of Krakow, Poland, an organization devoted to rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow. The JCC boasts over 850 Jewish members. It welcomes 10,000 visitors a month and is one of Poland's most visible signs of Jewish revival. He created Ride for the Living and Holocaust Survivor Day, 2 global initiatives with tens of thousands of participants. Prior to the JCC's opening, he taught Hebrew at Krakow's Jagiellonian University Department of Jewish Studies for 6 years, and he founded the Gesher Association for Polish-Israeli Dialogue. He's a native of New York City. Jonathan moved to Israel. He made Aliyah in 1994. He lived for 7 years on a kibbutz in the Negev and served in a combat unit in the IDF before moving to Poland in 2001. He's a founding member of the Krakow Association of Christians and Jews, where he serves as vice president. He also serves on the boards of the Krakow branch of the Child Survivors of the Holocaust Organization, Hillel Poland, JCC Global, and the Abraham Global Peace Initiative. Jonathan, a primary architect of Poland's contemporary Jewish rebirth, is a frequent international speaker and media contributor on issues relating to Jewish Poland. He is also an activist for Holocaust survivors. We are honored and privileged to have Jonathan Ornstein with us this morning, please.
Shabbat Shalom. I'll apologize in advance for any screaming that might come out of the first row. Could be my daughter. These are difficult days for the Jewish people, but these are not the first difficult days for the Jewish people. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Israel and Poland and hope. When I think of hope, there are 2 things that come to mind. One is Hatikva, the anthem of the State of Israel, a well-chosen anthem, I think. And the other is Shawshank, the Shawshank Redemption. very important movie with an interesting quote. I think the movie is about hope. This quote is, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best thing, and no good thing ever dies." And I think this very interesting idea of the eternal aspect of hope, and perhaps why it was chosen to be the anthem of the state of Israel, the reconstituted homeland of the Jewish people. About a month after October 7th, I was in Israel on a private mission with a few people to see the after effects of the Hamas attack. And I saw a lot of different things, as you would imagine, some very, very difficult, most very difficult. It hasn't gotten much easier over the last few months, especially as the hostages are still there, or some of the hostages. But one thing really stuck with me, and that is I was in the Dead Sea in a hotel where some of all the displaced people from the south and then from the north were all over Israel. And sometimes they were together in one place. And I was in a hotel in the Dead Sea where all of the members of Kibbutz Be'eri were. And as you probably remember, that was in many ways the hardest hit kibbutz place in Israel. They lost a tremendous amount of people, a large percentage of their kibbutz. And I was meeting with them, and I said, "Oh, so the entire kibbutz is here?" They said, yes, everybody's here except for a few that went back. And I said, I thought I didn't understand what they meant. I said, what do you mean? They said, no, a few of the members, particularly young people without children, felt safer, are back rebuilding the kibbutz. Now, if that was happening now, you'd say, wow, that's quite early. There are still, as we know, my phone is constantly buzzing for the rockets that are being launched at Israel all the time. But this was almost 2 months ago. The idea that survivors of that horrific attack who were still waiting for their family members and friends who were held hostage in Gaza, the idea that they wanted to go back to this place next to the border and rebuild was fascinating to me, but really incredibly Jewish to me. The idea that the Jewish response to tragedy, whatever the scale of the tragedy, has always been and must always be to rebuild. I'll tell you a story from Poland. There were two sisters in Krakow. And Krakow is about, if you haven't been to Krakow, a very beautiful city, it's about an hour's drive from Auschwitz, 40 miles from Auschwitz. And there were two sisters, grew up Catholic, no idea about anything beyond their Catholic identity. Not that they were very religious, but went through the usual official religious Catholic things. And at one point, when they're in their 20s, the sisters are about a year apart, one of the sisters got curious about the family. They didn't know too much about their father's family, and found out that they were Jewish. And one sister got very involved, the other sister not too interested. Not that it was a religious thing, she wasn't going to church, but she just didn't feel the need to try to connect to this aspect of their identity. But eventually, the older sister brought the youngest sister to the JCC that had been opened a couple of years earlier, and the younger sister at a Hanukkah party met a JCC staff member. He happened to be a very charismatic, good-looking staff member at the JCC. They got along very, very well, and they decided to get married. This younger sister became far more interested in her Jewish identity, and a few years later, they got married, and they have a child, and that daughter is the youngest kid in the JCC preschool, and she might be the youngest congregant at B'nai Torah today. I thought you realized when I said charismatic, good-looking, that it was me. I'm only mildly insulted that charismatic and good-looking wasn't even a hint for who we're talking about. How is this happening? My wife is not the only person finding out she's Jewish today. I don't think in this synagogue many people walk in every day having just found out they're Jewish. It does happen all over. We know the Madeleine Albright story, but it's uncommon. But this is happening today in Poland in great numbers. Now, how is that happening? Poland was a very Jewish place. I won't go too deep into Jewish history. Poland was a very, very Jewish place for a very long time. We don't always realize how Jewish Poland was, but 200 years ago, 3/4 of the Jews living in the world were living in Poland. That's almost like Israel and America today is what Poland was for the Jewish people. 75% of Jews in the world were living in Poland. 1939, Holocaust, Germany invades from one side, Soviet Union invades from the other, and by the end of World War II, 90% of Polish Jews are murdered. There were 3.5 million Jews living in Poland before the Holocaust, 10% of the country. 60% of the lawyers and 40% of the doctors. The middle class, overwhelmingly Jewish. Over half the victims of the Holocaust were Polish Jews. Over half. We know there were survivors. Many came to this community, to your community, to South Florida, wherever they could go. And usually for us, in the Jewish world, that's the end of the story. Jews lived in Poland, Jews were killed in Poland, some survived, survivors left. Poland exists in the past tense. But not exactly. Why? Because not all the survivors left Poland. Some stayed in Poland, and during difficult times of communism, they kept hope. They didn't give up their Jewish identities, they gave them up externally. Like in Spain 500 years ago. They outwardly stopped being Jewish, but they inwardly maintained some small aspect of their Jewish identity. And in 1989, when communism ended, it was very surprising for the Poles as well. It was for us on this side of the world. And starting in 1989, something very interesting is happening. And that is the children, the grandchildren, now even the great-grandchildren of the Holocaust survivors who stayed in Poland, families like my wife's family, are finding out they're Jewish and reconnecting Jewishly. And we have an opportunity today that we never realized that we would have as the Jewish people. We understood that what we could do about the Holocaust was to commemorate, was to mourn, was to try to make sure it never happens to us or anyone else again. But we didn't think that we could actually change the numbers. Those 6 million to us are written in stone. But the 6 million victims of the Holocaust are not the only victims of the Holocaust. There are secondary victims of the Holocaust. The people who lost their identities, people like my wife, the people like the hundreds and thousands of others who are finding out they're Jewish, they are also, in some sense, a different sense, victims of the Holocaust. And what an opportunity we have today to reach out and bring those lost Jews back into the fold. What better way to honor the victims of the Holocaust and honor the survivors than to go out and find their lost family members and bring them back? To me, this goes levels beyond only commemorating and remembering and building monuments. These are important things to do, but we can actually tachlis, we can actually take this in our hand and reach out and do something about the number of victims of the Holocaust. And once we can do something like this, how do we not do it? And this is all because those Jews, those Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors who stayed, somehow, through their families, never lost hope. Our JCC was founded by King Charles, as you heard, which is an interesting story, maybe for the Q&A after the Kiddush. King Charles met with some Holocaust survivors in 2002 on a visit to Krakow, and he wanted to help them. And they said, we don't have a place to be together. And he was inspired by their lives, by their stories of maintaining their Jewish identity. And in 2008, our center was opened in the presence of King Charles and the King and the Queen. I knew them when they were only the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, but we've stayed in touch. He's very proud of our center. I've met with him subsequently in London and briefed him about our efforts. He takes a very active interest in our work. So our center is a little like a regular JCC, but it's like a JCC if you closed all the other Jewish buildings in town. God forbid. I think she really wants to make a speech as well. Sunaya. What does that mean? It means we have a preschool where someone is a student, BBYO, Hillel. We have Shabbat dinners every week. We have 300 people, 400 people studying Hebrew, Arabic class, Yiddish class, and we have, true to our original mission, 50 Holocaust survivors that we're taking care of. There's no federation in Poland. That's us doing all the heavy lifting, taking care of these 50 Holocaust survivors, having the privilege to take care of 50 Polish Holocaust survivors. Okay, I was expecting more disruption. And our community has something that it's never had before. Since 1939, the Polish Jewish community has not had hope. There was an idea, there were some Polish Jews, we need to take care of them, but not Hillel and not BBYO and not a preschool looking toward the future. When the Ukraine war started 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, we made a couple decisions. One was that we were going to do all we can to help the refugees. The other is that we were going to help Jews and non-Jews. And our center, which is a small institution, doubled in size overnight. We went from 35 to 75 full-time members. And we, so far, directly have helped 300,000 Ukrainian refugees, 90% of whom are women and children. And we spent $10 million helping Ukraine, which is 5 times our annual budget. And why have we taken this upon ourselves? There's a story that I think for me reminds me why we're doing what we're doing for Ukraine, which is there's an international organization called the Hidden Children Organization, Child Survivors of the Holocaust. And we have a branch in Krakow, very active branch, and they meet the last Saturday of every month at 11 a.m. in our JCC. And when I'm in town, which is too infrequent because I'm traveling a lot, but when I'm there in Krakow, I always go to these meetings. And in the beginning of the war, in March 2022, we had a meeting, a regular meeting, and in the room that we meet, it's right across from a food pantry that we started. We still have about 300 women and children a day coming into our food pantry for Ukraine. That's open every day. For us, every day is every day. That means Shabbat, that means Yom Kippur, that means Christmas, that means New Year's Day. We've never closed it since the second day of the war. Anyway, Saturday morning, we're having our meeting of Holocaust survivors, and right across the hall, these women, some older women, some younger women, some being pushed in wheelchairs, some pushing strollers, are going into the food pantry and taking whatever they need. Maybe diapers, maybe rice, milk for the babies, whatever they need, a toothbrush, anything they need. And at one point, the woman, one of the survivors, who was a little girl in the Warsaw Ghetto, who survived by being passed through the ghetto wall on the other side of the ghetto wall by her parents, and was raised by non-Jews. She always knew her identity. She survived. Her parents were murdered. And she, during this meeting, stood up and she pointed across the hall, maybe about 20 feet away, to these Ukrainian refugees, these women, and she said, "That was me. 80 years ago, that was me. This was us." And she voted, she said, "I propose that we take our annual dues, which are about $12 a year, and we donate them to help Ukraine." And one by one, the Holocaust survivors' hands went up. They unanimously voted to give their annual dues to help Ukraine. Why did they do that? If you think about it, child survivors are interesting. One, they themselves were helped. No child survived on his own. Child survivors were helped and for the most part lost their families. And for the most part, their families weren't helped. So they have seen in the most extreme manner what it means to be given help and what it means to be forsaken. And these child survivors have chosen hope. They've chosen to say, we know what suffering means, and we have a particular responsibility to try to prevent the suffering of others. On October 7th, when Hamas attacked, we had many Israelis in Poland. There's a lot of Israelis in Poland going back and forth, a lot of tourism, a lot of ties between Israel and Poland. And we immediately reacted. Our building is covered, the outside of our building is covered with hostage photos, the kidnapped posters. We have a giant banner on our building which says, "Bring them home." And we have many Israelis that have been displaced that are now finding refuge in Krakow. In our preschool, where this formerly well-behaved young girl is a student, half of the preschool now are Israeli kids, displaced Israeli kids. So if you think about it, these are Israelis, for the most part, many of them whose grandparents escaped Poland to find refuge, and now, temporarily I hope, are finding refuge in Poland, a place that for 1,000 years had been a refuge for the Jewish people. I think that if we can remain united, the Jewish people, and hopeful, then our enemies, whether the Nazis or modern-day Nazis called Hamas, do not stand a chance. And if Poland of all places, again, we're talking about Poland. As much as we think about Poland, I think we always thought about it in the context of suffering, of tragedy, of the Holocaust. If Poland can once again become a refuge, a place of life, a refuge for Jewish people, both local Jewish Poles finding out about their identity, and refugees from Ukraine, displaced Israelis. If Poland can become once again a place of hope, then I think it should give hope to all of us that we will overcome this current crisis and any crises in the future. Am Yisrael Chai, Shabbat Shalom.
So first of all, it's great to, I'd say great to be here, great to still be here. And I'm happy that we have this opportunity to meet each other in a little less formal way. So our work with Ukraine was very important, and I think an extension of how we see our responsibility. The Krakow Jewish community is not only just another community in the Jewish world, but the Krakow Jewish community has, I think, particular importance because of where we are, because we are the Jewish community next to Auschwitz. And what we're able to do there, I think, speaks volumes about who we are as a people. But when October 7th happened, it was natural to us as an organization that's very connected to Israel, as an organization that is a very Zionist organization led by someone who's an Israeli citizen who made Aliyah, who was a lone soldier. Then the idea that we would do all we can to support Israel was no decision. It was automatic. What we're seeing in terms of Israelis is on a few different levels. One, you had Israelis that were just stuck in Europe. So when the war started, the flights stopped. Only El Al was flying only out of a few places. And you had people that were just stranded in Krakow. Israelis that were there, a lot of Israelis traveled during Sukkot. So it was Simchat Torah, the end of Sukkot, and we had Israelis there. So at the very beginning, we started, what was happening was you had these Israelis there, they didn't have medication. They were, there's a pharmacy we work with. I helped to get a lot of Israelis medication. Some of them didn't have housing. They didn't have space in the hotels where they'd been staying. So it was very much just kind of emergency services to a stranded population. We set up a room in the JCC where we had Israeli music playing, Bamba, Bisli, people that spoke Hebrew, just to kind of help. We didn't know what was going on. We have to remember that, this is unprecedented for all of us. Watching it here in South Florida, in New York, in Israel, in Poland, this was an unprecedented event. We're still in unprecedented times since October 7th. So we wanted to be a resource for the Israelis that were in town. On another level, we started to see Israelis that were reaching out, asking about life in Poland. So Poland is part of the European Union. There are, I believe, 27 countries in the European Union. If you have citizenship in any of those 27 countries, you can live and work, study, send your kids to school. You have full privileges in all 27 countries. So moving from Spain to Poland is like moving from Michigan to Nebraska. Essentially, it's easy to do. So we had people starting to reach out when they realized, when they'd heard that Poland is a safe place to be Jewish. The word has gotten out. Poland also has a very small Muslim population, which unfortunately is connected to issues of anti-Semitism and safety in Europe. So we started to get inquiries. And what I think we're seeing is something in some ways very surprising. Oh, wow, Jews moving to Poland, or Jews coming to Poland. It seems like the last place Jews would move to because of our perspective, seeing everything through the prism of the Holocaust. But if you think about it, we are still around as a people because we are adaptable. We have the ability to move. None of us, I'm going to guess that none of your families have been in South Florida for 200 or 300 years, right? I don't know if many of you are probably not here the full year. So we are able to move. Our strength as a people, life is good somewhere, we take advantage of that, we do our best, and if life is no longer good, then we move somewhere else and we find some place that life is thriving. And in Europe today, the number of places that have a decent economy is one group. The number of places that have low anti-Semitism is another. And if you look at the overlap, at the Venn diagram, overlap of places that the economy is decent or better and places that are safe to be Jewish, the big country right in the middle there is Poland. So, of course, it's surprising when we originally think about it because we're conditioned to seeing Poland almost exclusively through the prism of the Holocaust. If we take a few steps back and we say Jews were living in Poland over the centuries, it was good and bad, then it falls off a cliff in 1939. Till 1989, there's essentially not much at all going on. And since 1989, slowly, there's this reawakening of Jewish life happening. This is natural. Today, one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe is Germany, right? What is the German community made up of? German Jewish community. Very, very small amount of German Jews. a large amount of Jews from the former Soviet Union that Germany gave citizenship to, and many, many Israelis. We find where life is good and we're able to adapt. That's our strength, and that's what we're seeing today in Poland. So we're trying to not to tell Israelis, come move to Poland, but we think that people should live wherever they want, and if they want to live in Poland, then we'll try to help make sure that they can lead the type of Jewish lives that they want to.
Thank you. The questions?
Hello? Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been very, very thoughtful and very, very important. Poland and Israel have had diplomatic relations for a long time. My feeling is that it has not been warm, fuzzy and warm. Would you comment on the diplomatic relations between the countries?
Yes, I think that for the last 30 years, history is interesting. History is very dependent on perspective, right? You could take the history and you could say the history of a week, or you can take the history of a year or the history of 100 years. If you take the history of Israeli-Polish relations since communism ended, since 1989, and Poland was reconstituted as a democracy, I think that the two best friends of Israel in Europe are Czech Republic and Poland. In the last few years, because of the previous Polish government, that there were a lot of issues that had almost nothing to do with life today and everything to do with Holocaust memory. Essentially, you had a Polish government that was very focused on revisionist Holocaust history, on trying to say that Poland and Poles during World War II did nothing but try to save the Jews, and Israel didn't appreciate that perspective, rightly so, and that was causing friction between the two countries. But generally, on an academic level, on a tourist level, on a military level, on a diplomatic level, on almost every level, you have incredibly good ties between Israel and Poland. And it's important when we look at countries, I think it's interesting, when we look at our own country, we're able to say, oh, but America is far more complex than that. In other words, you are who you are. When a new president comes into power, it doesn't change automatically who you are. Yet, when we look at other countries, we somehow lose the nuance that we apply to our own country. So, Poland is, the Polish-Israeli relations are not only government to government, they're about the Polish people. In our JCC, when we have events, in the 15 years we've been open, when we've had events focused on Israel, we've had no extra security. We have Yom HaAtzmaut party, Israeli Independence Day party, outside in our courtyard, Israeli flags waving, no extra security. If we have Israeli film festival, Israeli speakers, there is no issue. Poles themselves, before we get to the government, even more important, the Polish people themselves are not very anti-Israel the way that a lot of places in Europe, especially Western Europe, are. And I think that comes from two reasons. One, look where Poland is in Europe. Poland is in a very tough neighborhood in Europe, right? Where is Poland? Poland is between Germany and Russia, right? Historically, in the last 500 years, this is not where you wanted to be in Europe. And I think Poles have an appreciation for Israel that's in a tough neighborhood and stands up for itself. And I think they like to see themselves the way that like Israelis. Oh, we're like Israel, we stand up for ourselves, surrounded by enemies. And the second part is, who built Israel? The first Knesset, more than half of the members of the first Knesset in 1948 were native speakers of Polish. Israel is a very Polish place, and Poles have a long memory of Jews living in Poland for 1,000 years. And these same people that were merchants and rabbis and scholars and teachers, the idea that these Polish Jews moved zip codes to the Middle East and suddenly became bloodthirsty, genocidal, people trying to kill the Arabs, this BBC narrative doesn't sit well in Poland. They know the Jews, and that's not what their memory of the Jews was like. So I think we have a very positive situation between Poland and Israel. You know, if you go to the mall in Poland, now it's a little different with travel and what's happening since October 7th. If you went to the mall, a big mall 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago in Poland, and you walked around, the language that you heard all the time was what? Hebrew. Why? Because Israel is very expensive and Poland is much cheaper, and you have Israelis that flew for a few days to come to Krakow, go to Warsaw, not only to see heritage sites and Holocaust sites, but to actually just do what people need to do, go shopping.
Great, thank you.
So I will join everyone who is thanking you for everything you've done here, and being from Poland, a Jew from Poland, for everything you do there. I am originally from Warsaw, so I will introduce myself to you, the 96 basically generation, even though I left after 68. I'm sorry, 1968 generation. I would like to ask you, how would you compare Jewish communities in Warsaw and Krakow? I don't think from what I've seen they are the same. In Krakow seems to be very JCC centered, where in Warsaw I think it's centered around the old synagogue. But I'd like you to maybe tell us how do you see the two communities?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
So people visit us and they go to Krakow and to Warsaw, and they often think that Krakow is the largest Jewish community in Poland, which is not true, but I take it as a compliment that people feel that we're the largest. Krakow is unique in Europe, really in the world, because we are home to the largest intact Jewish neighborhood, Jewish pre-war neighborhood anywhere. So in Krakow, within a 10-minute walk of our JCC, and many of you have been there, we have 7 renovated pre-war synagogues. Our youngest synagogue, the youngest of the 7, is from 1862. That's the baby. And the oldest is from the 15th century. And they're literally all within a 10-minute walk. So there's something quite unique in Krakow in terms of the Jewish heritage. But in terms of the pure numbers, the Jewish community, Warsaw is a much larger city. It's about 4 times the size of Krakow and probably triple the Jewish community. There is a JCC in Warsaw as well. It's much smaller. Somebody once told me that when the Jews went underground during communism, when the Jews were forced underground, in Warsaw they became communists, and in Krakow they became Catholic. And it's an easier path back to Judaism from communism than from Catholicism. So I don't know if that's true, but I think it's a good story. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks and for being here. We found it very interesting. We were in Poland about 5 years ago, and we had the opportunity to visit the Jewish Museum in Warsaw. And I remember leaving there thinking, this is not a place for Jewish people, because going back to the history, the Poles, they loved us, they hated us, they expelled us, they killed us, they welcomed us back, and it's a cycle over and over and over. In light of that, how do you feel for the future of Jewish people in Poland today?
Thank you. So the museum that this gentleman is referring to is the Polin Museum in Warsaw, which is a wonderful museum of the history of Polish Jews. And what it isn't is only a Holocaust museum, because Polish history, as you mentioned, I think that was a very accurate portrayal of Polish Jewish history. They liked us, they expelled us, they didn't like us, they welcomed us back, they killed us. But this is the history of the Jews in Europe. America, we are the ones with the outlier history. North America. This is the history of Jews everywhere. It was good for the Jews in the Muslim world, and then it wasn't. Right? In Europe, it was good. It was, you know where it was great to be Jewish in Europe in the 1930s, in the 1920s? Germany. The world changes. The world changes, as I said earlier. Today, Poland is an easy, safe place to be Jewish. If you ask me about anti-Semitism, it exists, of course, but it doesn't make my top 10 problems or challenges as a community leader in Poland. So sometimes places are good and they get better, and they get worse and they get better. We see that everywhere. No place is permanent. No people, I think, are inherently pro-Jewish or anti-Jewish. It's just, depending on circumstance, a lot of it. And today, there are people finding out they're Jewish in Poland, and we all owe it to them to try to bring them back into the fold. And if they want to live in Poland because Poland's a good place, then we should help them live in Poland. And if they want to come to South Florida, then I'll give you guys a call and we'll help them move to Boca.
I was privileged to be on a Federation trip from Nashville to see you about, they were just opening the Warsaw Museum when we were there. Anyway, it is so strange that you would say, my children just moved 2 weeks ago from Detroit to Omaha. You just said going from Detroit to Nebraska. That was a funny coincidence. When my Gentile friends ask me about what's going on in the whole war right now, and they say, well, what about all these poor Palestinian people? And I said, yeah, it's a problem. But look at the picture when Ukraine was in a war suddenly. Everybody all over the world took in Ukrainians. Whether it was Nashville, whether it was Poland, wherever it was, people were willing to take in Ukrainians. Who's taking in these Gazans? Nobody wants them. There's got to be a reason. And I was just wondering if you could, expound on the way the Ukrainian people have been able to be absorbed and relative to this other situation.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's been amazing to see the world open up to Ukrainians. If we, a little JCC, have been able to help 300,000 Ukrainians so far, that's a big number. And Poland has helped millions and millions of Ukrainians. Gaza, we start to get into something very complicated. The refugees, it's not like refugees are trying to leave. They're not allowed to leave. Hamas controls them. Historically, the Arab world has not cared about the Palestinians. You have the situation that you have. It's been very convenient for the Arab world to have this Palestinian refugee question. We also had refugees from the Arab world that came to Israel. We didn't keep them in refugee camps for 75 years. We made them citizens. So, this has been a very convenient outlet for dictatorships in the Middle East. If people they need to protest and march against something instead of marching against their corruption in their own countries or the king who might be stealing all the money from the oil, they allow them to focus on this one issue, the Palestinians. But of course, the Arab world has not cared and has not been a friend to the Palestinians, nor has the Western world. If you think about it, the acceptance of Palestinian terrorism, I think, has enabled Palestinian terrorism and has discouraged negotiation. And if you think you're going to get everything and the world encourages you, then you keep trying to get everything. And that's why we have the tragic situation that we have now. We should never, ever forget that there was a deal offered in 1948. First of all, that about 80% of the original territory of Palestine became Jordan. And then the remaining part was partitioned, and the Jews accepted it because we understand about negotiation, and it's not a focus for us only on pride. And the Arab world rejected it because they thought they would defeat the Jewish state, and they lost. And all that's been happening since 1948 is a continuation of that war of independence for us. That they called a catastrophe, but it should have been independence for them, and it shouldn't have been a catastrophe. There should be there should have been a Dubai. Dubai should have been next to Israel right now, as a force, an economic force. And instead, they made bad choices encouraged by the Arab world and the non-Arab world, and that's why you get what you have today, unfortunately.
So that really, by the way, this is wonderful, and I didn't want it to end. So,
Closer to
two things. You started your talk with keep hope alive. We keep hope alive for an Arab-Israeli resolution. Two-part question. One of them is, you're from New York. You went to Israel. You left Israel and went to Krakow. Tell us about that. What was going through your mind? Why you did that? Since it's very hard for New Yorkers to leave in the first place, but it's even harder for Israelis to leave. And the second question is, and are you and is Krakow and what you've done in Krakow an inspiration from some other countries in that part of the world?
It seems like it's not too difficult for New Yorkers to leave and go to Florida. So New Yorkers can go. Yeah, it's the same. Well, better weather. Essentially, my story is that I was starting law school in North Carolina, and I thought it might not be for me, so I deferred for a year. And I didn't think they'd let me defer. They were more than happy to let me defer. And it was getting cold in New York. And I met somebody who was on a kibbutz in Israel, and it sounded fun. So I went to Israel in one kibbutz, and then to another kibbutz, and I fell in love with Israel. I decided to make Aliyah and to join the army. I went to the army when I was 28, which was old. It's not old, but it's a relative, it's an advanced age to go be a combat soldier. That was interesting. And I was in Gaza for 4 months. I was in Lebanon. That was before we left. And I was back on the kibbutz in the middle of the desert, kibbutz Yotvata, near Eilat. And so if you know Israel a little bit, you maybe know the chocolate milk. It's famous for the dairy, Yotvata. And I was deciding, like kibbutzniks do, should I stay on the kibbutz? Should I move to Tel Aviv? And I met a Polish woman, different Polish woman, right? You're like, I'm seeing a trend here. Well. And I fell in love, and I decided to move to Poland sight unseen, which was a strange thing to do. So I moved to Poland, and didn't work out with her, and I was teaching, but I liked Krakow, and I decided to stay. And they were building this JCC, and I was literally the only person in Poland who knew what the letters JCC stood for, which was clearly enough to get me the job. So there you go.
And are there other Krakows?
Are there other Krakows? There are other JCCs all around Europe. I think Krakow is a particularly dynamic, again, it's like, so you're asking me if my kid is cute, like, I think, particular. Krakow, I think, is a special place because, I said earlier, because it's next to Auschwitz, and it has certain expectations, and because it's so dramatic, right? The dramatic aspect of seeing life in a place that we so strongly associate with death, I think, is important. But again, I think also that's why the rebirth, what we're doing in Krakow, I don't think is a local project. In other words, and again, nobody's objective about their community, and there's Bucharest, and there's Warsaw, and there's Sofia, there's a lot of communities in Europe that are important and need support. But I think that there's tremendous added value. The idea that our children, our grandchildren, can go to Auschwitz and see that our people was put in ovens and killed and gassed in this terrible way, and then come down the road an hour's drive away and come to a JCC where they see Jews and non-Jews working together to rebuild Jewish life in an open, colorful, pluralistic, optimistic environment. I think it reminds our young people, it helps us not define ourselves as victims. One of our challenges, and this is going to be much more difficult after October 7th, one of our challenges, one of the things that we're most focused on in the Jewish world, and there are people here from JCC Association and involved in all different organizations, one of the main things we talk about is engagement. How do we transmit this love of being Jewish, this desire to be connected, to be engaged, to a generation that's distracted, that might not have as strong ties to Judaism as we do, that marries people that aren't Jewish? How do we keep these people connected? How do we keep the Jewish people going? And one of the main challenges is for us not to define ourselves as victims. If we see ourselves as victims, then long-term people won't want to be Jewish. Anti-Semitism is part of the Jewish people. It's been with us for thousands of years, but it should never be the defining principle of what makes us Jewish. And for young Jews especially, to come to Poland and to see the tragedy and the death, but then to see the strength and resilience. They're part of a people that was killed in a horrible way, yes, but they're also part of a people that's so strong and so resilient that we can thrive down the road from Auschwitz. And I think this is the real importance beyond just our local community.
On a lighter note, is Krakow still in the center of the world of klezmer music?
Yes, Krakow is, the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow is the largest Jewish culture festival in the world, which started out very much as a klezmer festival, now is much larger than that. But think about it, not Boca or the Upper West Side or Brooklyn. The largest Jewish culture festival in the world is in Krakow, Poland, started 30-something years ago, 33, 34 years ago, by two non-Jews, one of whom is still running it. So there's an incredible interest among non-Jews in everything Jewish in Poland today, which creates the environment that's conducive to Jewish life that we need for young people, people like my wife finding out they're Jewish. If you find out you're Jewish in a place of tremendous anti-Semitism, why would you step forward? People are only choosing to be Jewish today in Poland because there's an environment that's conducive to Jewish life. Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any opposition to helping the Ukrainians. I've heard many Jewish people who said, why are we helping Ukraine? They were so bad to the Jews during the Holocaust and before. And I was wondering how you dealt with that, or if that came up at all with
A little bit. I mean, when I walk into work every day, there are baby carriages lined up in front of our gate. Women and children, older women. Since October 7th, we've had to close the gate. We're worried about security as everywhere. We live in Europe without borders, so we don't worry about Polish anti-Semitism, but we've changed the security and we have to there are people in chairs standing out, waiting to come in and take food in our food pantry. These women and children, should I think, oh, what your grandparents may or may not have done? I mean, these are innocent people, and it's not in our interest to look at them and wonder how much they helped or hurt Jews, 3 generations ago. These are innocent people. And I will tell you that 80 years ago, when the Jews were the other, nobody cared about us. Nobody helped us. So does our takeaway from that is 80 years later, now we can not care about others the way others didn't care about us? I think we understand what it means to be forsaken and have a particular responsibility not to do that to others.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I have another quick question. I'm wondering if you cooperate or coordinate some of your activities with Michael Shudrich, who's the chief rabbi in Warsaw. We actually visited Krakow and Warsaw 5 years ago, and we met him, and we were at his synagogue for Yom Kippur.
We do. Michael Shudrich is the chief rabbi of Poland. His mom lives in Delray. So he's down here very often. He's a very close friend. He married me and my wife, and I talk to him all the time. So he's a very, very close friend. Yeah.
My wife and I were very fortunate to be able to visit Poland on a mission from Canada. And Krakow, the JCC was inspirational. It was just, to us, it was a mirage in a desert, and amazing work that was being done. You gave a warm, fuzzy feeling about how Poland sort of allows the Jewish community to be part of their culture. But some of our kids take the March of the Living, and there's stories that when they're marching in the areas near the camps, that they get very bad reaction from citizens, Polish citizens along the route. And that gives the students a very negative impression. I wonder how you reconcile these.
Yeah, thank you. You know, March of the Living has gotten much better as an organization. We've been working with March of the Living for a while, and it used to be very frustrating. March of the Living would come to Krakow, and I remember when we 15 years ago or so, and speaking to these marchers, these young people and their leaders, and I would stand in front of our building, and I'd say, oh, would you like to come in and meet with some Polish survivors, people that stayed, young people who are just finding out they're Jewish? And they'd say, no, I'm sorry, we've got to go. I'd say, okay, where are you going? They'd say, well, we just went to Belzec and Treblinka and Majdanek and Auschwitz, and we're hurrying to Birkenau. In other words, to Schindler factory. In other words, there was a tremendous focus only on death and destruction. And I don't think when there's Jewish life blooming that it's fair not to show it. So we put a big banner in front of our building, and you can go online and find it, where for March of the Living, we put a banner that said, hey, March of the Living, come inside and see Jewish life. And you know what they did? They did come inside and see Jewish life, and now we work very, very closely with March of the Living. We have, last year in 2 days, I spoke to 23 different groups. We had a few thousand of the marchers, and I think March of the Living has made tremendous strides and understand that, yes, we must show young people the Holocaust, and we must learn the lessons of the Holocaust, absolutely. But if there's a positive story in Poland as well, then we can also show the positive story. It's not a detriment to these young people. If we have an opportunity of showing young people, again, the same thing I said before, if we have the opportunity to show something positive, to show Jewish life, to show our strength as a people, then that's what we need to show these young people. So in terms of responses, I think sometimes people say, it's funny, people say, oh, we were marching in the street and everyone was staring at us. And I go, okay, well, how many of you were marching? They go, oh, there were 150 of us. And I go, were you dressed all the same? They go, yes, we were all wearing these blue jackets. And I'd say, oh, there were 150 of you marching down the middle of the street and everybody was staring at you? And they say, yes. I say, of course everybody's staring. If you were walking down the street in Misner Park, they'd be staring at you with 150 of you in jackets. So I think sometimes we see what we're looking to see, and I don't mean to be an apologist for Polish anti-Semitism or anything, but we've been there. I've been living there 23 years, haven't had any issues. The JCC's been open for 15 years, never really had any issues. And I think that the March of the Living has gotten much better in helping the young people understand that these people that are interested in looking at them, it's not necessarily hostile, but it's very complicated. People come through your country, a country that was occupied by Germany, and they come to learn about death and destruction. It's a very complicated equation going on.
Well, we appreciate your visit and your efforts on our behalf. I recall that a few years ago, quite a few years ago really, the Catholic Church established a nunnery at Auschwitz, and in order to pray for the souls of the dead, and the Jewish leadership petitioned the Pope, if I recall correctly, to bar the nuns from the premises, and there was a whole kerfluffle over that. How did that play out, and is there any lingering ill will then, between the Jews and the Catholics in Poland?
Very complicated. It's a good question, and I particularly like your use of the word kerfuffle. So extra credit. The Carmelite nuns built, there was the monastery. The thing for us to understand, we see Auschwitz. Auschwitz for us is what? A place of Jewish death, a place of tragedy, a giant Jewish cemetery. But Auschwitz was set up originally for Polish prisoners, right? So it's a Polish national museum, and it was, so there's the Polish element as well that we don't necessarily focus on because so much of the suffering was Jewish. So there's an excellent book about that called The Crosses of Auschwitz, which was written by a very, very close friend of mine she's Canadian, but she's a professor at the University of Michigan, called Geneviève Zubritsky. where you can find out. But yes, essentially the whole thing died down, and there is some still element of that there. They didn't take everything down, but now we've sort of all moved on. And I remember Avi Weiss, the rabbi from Riverdale, who's a very activist rabbi, was involved there in protesting. So yeah, it gets into, it's complicated. Poland and the Jewish people, you get into competing victimhoods. In other words, we were the victims in the Holocaust, right? But the Holocaust, the backdrop of the Holocaust was World War II, where Poland really suffered. So it's sometimes, with German Jewish reconciliation is easier, right? The Germans say, we did it, we're sorry, we offer this, and we say yes or no and thank you. But Poland is saying, wait, we also suffered, and we're saying, oh, you need to acknowledge our suffering. And we say, oh, you should acknowledge our suffering, but we should also acknowledge Polish suffering. And the fact that some Poles hurt Jews during the war doesn't negate Polish suffering during the war. So complicated.
Hi. So I know churches and synagogues in Europe are funded by the government. So talk to us about the day-to-day, how many staff you have, how you get funded, how many programs you have, more of the tachlis of your JCC.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it depends on the country. So things, religious life in Germany is paid for by the government, it's taxed. But that's not exactly the case everywhere. In Poland, it's less. Poland less so. So our JCC is, we are the largest Jewish organization in Poland. Before the Ukraine war started, we were about 35 full-time employees. Now we're about 75 full-time employees. Our budget, without the Ukraine part, is about $2 million a year. We raise over 95% of that in the United States. We have a 501c3, Friends of JCC Krakow organization, so people can make donations, and we are entirely funded by North American Jewry, which is a unique model in Europe, a very complicated model. It also explains why I spend so much time outside of Krakow. For any of you who met me in Poland, that's amazing because I spend a lot of my time here. And it, of course, wasn't a coincidence when you said, oh, we talked about it, and I said, January I'll be in Florida, because January in Florida is a better place to be than Poland in January. So the JCC Association is for North American JCCs. We work very closely with them. Of course, what I think is amazing is the CEO of the JCC Association's name is Doron Krakow. So there you go, and I do a lot with them. I'll actually go to there's a thing for all the CEOs called the Mifgash, which is in Denver in a few weeks that I'll go to, and last year. So we work very closely. I have a lot of, we're sort of very connected, but officially the JCC Association is North American, the North American JCCs minus Mexico. I never quite understood that, but that's a separate issue. But there is JCC Global, which is the kind of the global body that I'm very involved. We have some people here that very involved in the JCC movement, of course, the Solomons. So JCC Global as well.
Hi, and welcome again, and it's just so exciting to see what you've been doing. You've probably been an inspiration, at least I hope, in other parts of Poland. Are there any plans to have any other communities develop the way they have in Krakow and Warsaw?
You have a community in Wrocław, which used to be Breslau. You have a Jewish community in Łódź, which Jews say Łódź, we don't know what that is, and then we say Lodz, and we go, oh, Lodz, Lodz. So there are Jewish communities in other places in Poland. They're much smaller. I mean, ours is small, but we're talking about, much smaller. I think what we have an advantage is tourism, right? So the idea that our community is next to Auschwitz, in many ways, is a negative. It's difficult that your community is next to Auschwitz and this place of death and tragedy, but it also means that a lot of people visit Krakow. And we've done, I think, a good job of making sure that when you come to see the death and destruction, you also come and see the life. So it used to be 20 years ago, you came to Poland, you came to Krakow, it was Auschwitz period, and now I think it's Auschwitz, comma.
Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, we visited Krakow. Our observations were that Krakow is a fun city to be in for tourists, And I wonder if that's part of the charm of the city, part of the reason that you're so successful in Krakow. Like when we were in Prague, we were told that Prague is in effect a poor man's Paris. Maybe Krakow is that way as well, and there's something magical about it.
Paris is a poor man's Krakow. So, no, there is, and again, it's funny. Certain things you make a very important point, which is we can talk and talk and talk and say about Jewish this and Jewish that. Krakow is a beautiful city, and it's a charming city, and there's a decent economy, and it's almost like, of course, you make a point that's so obvious that really should be said. It's like if we talk and talk and talk about Florida and say what a wonderful community you have and all this, and then we don't mention the weather. There's a reason that people from Toronto and Detroit and stuff are coming here in the winter, and there's a reason that Jewish life is thriving in Krakow, and part of it is that there's a decent economy that's going in the right direction, and it's a charming city, and it's a university city. We have 250,000 students in a city of 750,000, 800,000, so it's a very young vibe, and then that's part of it. So yes, it's the non-Jewish factors are also very, very important. We think, where do we want to be Jewish? If you want to move, you have to look for a place that you can have a decent life for your family, make a living, and also a place where you're not going to be persecuted for your beliefs, in this case for being Jewish. And that's Poland today, and it behooves us. And I think after October 7th, it was a wake-up call in many ways, right? Many different ways a wake-up call. And one of them is the one argument against Poland was a big argument, a very big argument. People would say Poland, I'd say, I live in Krakow, it's beautiful. And they say, but the Holocaust. In other words, now anti-Semitism 80 years ago has to be put in the context of anti-Semitism and an increasingly anti-Semitic, or a world that we're aware of the anti-Semitism today in an increasing way. So suddenly when saying, I have to figure out a place to live where I want to live with my family, to say, 80 years ago it was a terrible place, is no longer as powerful a metric as looking at the world today and thinking, today it's a decent place to be Jewish. I don't have the luxury of just putting an X across it because of what happened 80 years ago.
So, I can ask another question. This morning's Wall Street Journal had an article which was timely for your visit, and it was saying that a large percentage, not a majority, but like 35% of Ukrainians that left Ukraine at the time of the war are not looking to go back. They want to remain in the countries where they were displaced to. Are you seeing any of that with the ones you're dealing with?
It's interesting. So we've helped a huge amount of Ukrainian refugees, something like 300,000. And the majority of them, of course, are not Jewish, just because the majority of people in most places in the world are not Jewish. And the non-Jewish Ukrainians, for the most part, want to go back to Ukraine. They've been disconnected from their families, their husbands are still there, men between 18 and 65 cannot leave Ukraine. So the non-Jews want to go back. For the most part, the Jewish Ukrainians, and we have about 200 Jewish Ukrainians that have joined our community, that are very active now, members of our Krakow Jewish community, the Jewish Ukrainians want to stay. Now, isn't that interesting that the non-Jews want to go back and the Jews want to stay? Why is that? It's something that we've touched on a few times today. I think that it's in our memory, it's in our DNA that we have the ability, one, to go and pick up and move somewhere else, and two, there's a Jewish world that supports us, that embraces us. If you have families that move here, there's Federation, there's Jewish Family Services, there's synagogues, right? There's a whole network that will support Jewish people. And we can be so deep inside it that we sometimes can forget that the rest of the world doesn't have that. They haven't set up this ecosystem that we have where we support people that need it. So these Ukrainians understand their history, that they may have 100 years ago or 50 years ago come from somewhere else to get to Ukraine. And now they also understand that there's a community in Krakow, there's world Jewry that will help them live where they want to live. What's on top of this very interesting, I think, is that many of the Israelis that are displaced some coming from Israel. Who are they? They're Ukrainian Jews that the Jewish Agency brought to Israel when they left Ukraine when the war started. And now they're like, wait a minute, I left Ukraine to avoid war, and now this is happening again. And they haven't lived in Israel for a long time like other Israelis that feel like, oh, I couldn't leave during a war. And now they're the ones that are often leaving. So listen, we live in a very complicated world, and it's a challenge for us to be able to keep up with all of this and to be able to, support what needs to be supported. But it's also a challenge for us not to lose our Jewish values, right? Our Jewish values are taking care of the stranger, caring about the world, and it's very hard for us now to keep those values when we see a world that we feel has generally abandoned us. And a world that we feel we stand up for this group and we march with that group and civil rights and this one and that one. And then when we are in need, the world abandons us. And it's very hard for us to maintain our human decency and our Jewish values. Aya, go to mommy. Oh my God. Hope no one's, please no cameras on Shabbat, please. So it's hard for us to maintain our Jewish values when they're really questioned when we see a world that we care about not care about us so much.
Okay, great. The yoga class will start shortly. Okay, the last question.
Okay,
go ahead.
Thank you. Anti-Semitism on campuses in North America it's just horrible now. What is it like in Poland, in other countries in Europe? Are they experiencing the same thing?
No, it's not a thing that like things like BDS, if you say to people in Poland, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. The idea that Jews should be boycotted is something that, or Israel, Jewish businesses, whatever it is something that we went through in the 1930s and not something that's part of Poland today. So absolutely, you're not seeing, and again, it's maybe easy to say that we don't have large numbers, right? It's easy to not have much anti-Semitism when you don't have many Jews. But we live in a place that is very safe to be Jewish. Young people don't feel a threat. When these young people are finding out they're Jewish today in Poland, they're not immediately leaving. They don't want to go, oh, I found that I'm Jewish, I'm going to the US or going to Israel. They want to stay in Poland because Poland is a decent place to be Jewish, as it has been for a lot of the last 1,000 years. Not all of the last 1,000 years at all, but for a lot of the last 1,000 years, Poland was a decent place to be Jewish. There were, if we think for a second, the Holocaust, so much of the Holocaust happened in Poland because that's where the Jews were. But why were the Jews there? We're not so foolish as to stay in a country that's horribly Jews in 1939 in Poland. Doesn't say that life was perfect in Poland in 1939 for Jews, but says that over the years and over the centuries, it was a decent place to live for a lot of the history, and is once again.
All right. This is the last question, and then we're stopping. Thank you.
Von Wamen kommt deine Sprache? Where does your family originate from, and what do you want to give your daughter as a Polish, Jewish, and whatever other background she has?
My family on my mother's side is from Germany, and on my father's side is actually now is Ukraine and Romania, but really they would say Hungarian, so Satmar, Satumare, Munkac, these Mukachevo now in Ukraine, so Transylvania, so not Polish. I have Polish citizenship now, but not because of my family. I kind of got through the previous president or the two presidents ago, I got like a sneaky citizenship thing for services to Poland or something. My daughter, so for me, I love Krakow. Krakow's beautiful. I think you hear that I'm a big fan. I've been there 20-something years. Kasia, my wife, grew up in Krakow. But having a child is different, and I'm a very reasonably old, pretty old first-time father, and having a baby now and wanting her to have a strong Jewish upbringing, there is much more Jewish life in Krakow than when I found it, when I got there. But is there enough for my daughter, that's also an American citizen, that can also, I just haven't gotten around to it, get her Israeli citizenship as well. That's a question for me. So I want my daughter to have a strong Jewish upbringing, to feel the love and pride and responsibility that I feel as a Jew. And I have some big decisions to make about whether there's a strong enough environment for her in Krakow. Although we've built a lot, there's no day school in Krakow, and it's a tiny Jewish community. And these are questions that my wife and I are talking about a lot. And we have a couple more years. We have a preschool that she goes to at the JCC. That's till about age 6. And then we have to really, really think about it. And I can't just think where it's good for me and my life, but also where it's good for my daughter. I think she seems to like this synagogue, so I think we know where we'll wind up.
All right, well, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciated it.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.